Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to go back 21 years into the United States Senate. There it is. All right. This is Senator Sam Brownback. At the time, he was the senator from Kansas. And it was in the United States Senate that they were debating something known as partial birth abortion. And Senator Brownback showed a photograph of a baby in the womb 21 weeks after conception who was being operated on by doctors to spare the baby from death. They wanted to correct a birth defect in the womb. So he showed this picture of the little hand grasping the finger of the doctor. Here's a more dramatic shot. The doctors corrected the birth defect, and the baby was born. Ironically, the name of the baby was Samuel, same name as the senator. So Senator Brownback showed this photo in the United States Senate, and he asked this question: is little Samuel's hand the hand of a person, or is it the hand of a piece of property? And Senator Barbara Boxer from California said this: I am not a doctor and I am not God. I trust other human beings to make these decisions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, do you have to be a doctor or God to know that that right there is a human being? No. And she says, I trust other human beings to make these decisions. Do you realize we're not a democracy, but we are a representative republic? That we send representatives like Barbara Boxer to the United States Senate to make these decisions. And if she doesn't make those decisions, or can't make those decisions, she should resign. Well, she actually did resign. You know who took her place? You were on that, sister. Yeah, someone by the name of Kamala Harris took over for Senator Boxer after she was the district attorney of California. We'll come back to that later, but what I want to talk about today is, does Jesus trump your politics? And we're going to try and do this in 3 segments. The first question we're going to ask is, can we legislate morality? Because you often hear you can't legislate morality. And if we can't legislate morality, why would we even care about politics? The second question is, should Christians be involved in politics? Because for some reason, many Christians think we should not be. We're going to deal with that question head on. And then finally, where is Dave? Because I'm running out of juice on this machine. Forget it, I think I got it. It's warning me, you got no power. All right, we're back. The third question we're going to answer is, what should Christians do when we don't like either candidate? Not that I have anybody in mind. But that's what we're going to try and do here this morning. Now, I have a warning for you that what I'm going to say is going to be controversial. Some of you are not going to like what I have to say. That's okay. You have a right to be wrong. And we are going to be correct, not politically correct. There's too much political correctness in our society, and we need to just say the truth and what the truth is. So let's start with the first question: can we legislate morality? You always hear you can't legislate morality. Well, let me ask you a question. You see all these issues up here: abortion, life, marriage, men and women, sports, transitioning children, parental rights, even murder, theft, and rape. Do we legislate on those issues? Yes. Are those moral issues? Yes. Newsflash, ladies and gentlemen, all you can legislate is morality. The only question is, whose morality will we legislate? In fact, a number of years ago, the first book Dr. Geisler and I wrote was a book titled Legislating Morality. and we tackled this issue. People say all the time you can't do it when in fact that's all you can legislate. Think about this. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. You can't think of a law that doesn't legislate morality. Even speed limits are a legislation of morality. Why? Because they imply that there's a moral right to life. If life wasn't valuable, we'd have no speed limits. Run over anybody you want. It doesn't matter. No. Every law declares one behavior right and the opposite behavior wrong. So the only question is, whose morality will we legislate? And that's what we're going to get into in this section. Now, as soon as you bring something like this up, what's one of the first objections you're going to get? Especially if you're a Christian or a religious person. You're going to get, well, the separation of church and state. You can't legislate your morality. That would be wrong. All right. First of all, where does this separation of church and state business come from? Is this in the United States Constitution? No. What does the First Amendment to the United States Constitution say? It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. There's nothing in there about church. There's nothing in there about state. This is a phrase that comes from a Thomas Jefferson letter. When he was president, he wrote a letter to the Danbury Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut, because I think maybe they were worried that Jefferson was going to set up a national church. And what Jefferson did is he wrote them a letter and he said there's a wall of separation between church and state. But for Jefferson, the wall was one way. He didn't want the state telling the church what to do, but he wanted the church to be able to influence the state. It was a one-way wall. Although, you notice during COVID, the church was told by the state what the church could and couldn't do. The state told the church, you can't meet, you can't do this. That's a violation of the First Amendment. We're not going to fall for that again, are we? The state has no right to tell the church what to do, but that's exactly what it did during COVID. Anyway, the separation of church and state is not part of the Constitution. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. But even if it did, it would be irrelevant. Before I point out why it's irrelevant, let me point out that 5 of the 13 states, when they signed the Bill of Rights in 1791, you know, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution, 5 out of the 13 states had their own state churches. In fact, the last state to get rid of their state church was Massachusetts in 1833. They didn't get rid of it because they thought it was unconstitutional. They got rid of it just because they thought it wasn't a good idea. The states could have any church they wanted to. In fact, if you read state constitutions in the early days, they required you to be a believer in order to be in government. They required you to profess faith in Jesus Christ as your Savior. And they even had state churches. But they decided it wasn't a wise thing. The federal government couldn't have a state church. They wanted to get away from what they had in England. So they said there will be no state church for the feds. The states could have it. But look, even if the United States Constitution said that there's a strict separation between church and state, it's irrelevant, really, for our purposes here. Why? Because we're not trying to legislate religion. We're not trying to tell people where, when, how, or if to worship. That would be legislating religion. We're not trying to tell you got to be a part of a certain church or a denomination or participate in certain rites or rituals or declare a certain faith. Nobody's trying to say that. We're not trying to legislate religion, but we are trying to legislate morality. You see, religion has to do with our duty to God. Morality has to do with our duty to one another. Yes, they are related, but you can legislate morality without legislating religion. In fact, everybody's trying to legislate morality. Leftists are trying to legislate morality. In fact, let's just take abortion for an example, a very divisive issue for people. Do you know that both sides are trying to impose a moral position? Yeah, the pro-life side wants to impose continued pregnancy on the mother to protect the baby. The pro-abortion side wants to impose death on the baby whenever abortion is chosen. Both are moral positions. Both sides argue that they have some sort of moral right. The baby has a moral right to life. The mother has a moral right to do what she wants with her own body. Now, that's generally true, but not if you kill somebody else in the process. So, both sides are trying to impose morality. The only question is, whose morality? Here's the issue when it comes to this. The right to life is the right to all other rights. If you don't have life, you don't have anything. We'll dive into that a little bit more here in a few minutes. And by the way, this is what our country was founded on, morality. When the founders got together and signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, the famous phrase in the second paragraph, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their government." It doesn't say government. "Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted among men to secure these rights." Government doesn't give you rights. Government's just supposed to secure your rights, the rights you get from God. By the way, have you noticed that in our country, people seem to be creating rights about every 10 minutes? And many of these people are atheists. They have no moral standard by which to say there are rights. Do you realize if there is no God, if there is no standard beyond us that we're obligated to obey, that everything's a matter of opinion? That there are no rights? There's not only no right to abortion, there's no right to life if there is no God. There's not only no right to same-sex marriage, there's no right to natural marriage if there is no God. There are no trans rights, Christian rights, human rights. There are no rights of any kind unless God exists. And our founders knew this. Otherwise, everything's just a matter of opinion. And this is why, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, people who don't have a standard beyond themselves to point to and say, we're following this standard, they don't want to have a debate because they can't win on principle. They can only win by power. That's why they want to cancel the debate. That's where cancel culture comes from. You can only govern by principle or power. If you don't have principle, you're going to use power to shut other people up. Even Tim Waltz the other night in the debate, talking about censorship. He said, you don't have a right to shout a fire in a crowded theater. Well, yeah, unless there really is a fire. Or yeah, you don't want to put people in harm. But that's not the same as people disagreeing over political questions, and he's essentially using that, you can't shout fire in a crowded theater, to shut up political dissent. That's the first step toward totalitarianism and tyranny. It's a violation of the First Amendment, and he doesn't even recognize it. So, there are no rights unless God exists. By the way, the reason we declared our independence from the UK was because King George was legislating immorally. If you read the Declaration of Independence, it's one big long complaint list, right? He's not legislating properly. He is usurping our rights. And so the writers say, we submit these facts to a candid world, and we appeal to the supreme judge of the universe. Look, this country was founded on theism. Get over it. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. So they legislated religion without they legislated morality without legislating religion. They didn't say you had to be a believer, but you get your rights from God, even if you think he doesn't exist. That's where rights come from. But then they're going to say, well, don't impose your morality on me. Now, when people say that, it's sort of like them saying, don't impose your morals on me. It actually turns out to be a self-defeating statement, because when somebody says that, you can simply ask, then why are you imposing that moral on me? Can everybody see that this is a moral position up here at the top? They're saying you ought not impose ought nots. Then you can ask them, well, why are you imposing that ought not on me? Why can you impose ought nots, but I can't impose ought nots? You see, they're arguing from a moral position as well. Actually, the better answer is this. When somebody says, don't impose your morality on me, I think you ought to say this. This isn't my morality. I didn't make this stuff up. I didn't make up the fact that murder's wrong, that abortion's wrong, that rape is wrong, that theft is wrong, that you ought not castrate children. I didn't make up the fact that men were made for women and women were made for men, and the best way to perpetuate and stabilize society, which is the reason the government's involved in marriage to begin with, is to legally recognize that man-woman relationship over every other relationship. I didn't make any of this stuff up. This isn't my morality. This isn't your morality. This just happens to be the morality. The one Thomas Jefferson said was self-evident. The one the Apostle Paul said in Romans chapter 2, that the Gentiles who do not have the law written on their hearts. Everybody intuitively knows this morality, whether they believe in God or not. On these big issues, we know it's wrong to murder people. We know it's wrong to castrate children. We know that men were made for women and women were made for men. But sometimes we don't like it, so we suppress it. So I'm not legislating my morality. I'm not legislating your morality. I want to legislate the morality. The morality upon which this nation began. And by the way, this morality comes from God. But again, you don't need to believe in God to know it. And it's consistent with the Bible, even though you don't need the Bible to know it. When we're legislating, thou shalt not murder, yes, it's in the Bible, but you don't even need the Bible to know that. We're legislating it because it's part of the natural law. It comes from the same source that the Bible came from, God. And if people ever say, well, you can't legislate it because it's in the Bible, you might want to say to them, are you telling us we can't have laws against murder? Because that's in the Bible. We can't have laws against theft. You know, that's in the Bible. We can't have laws against rape. You know, that's in the Bible. Obviously, that would not be a violation of the separation of church and state to have laws against murder, rape, and theft. But yet people make these inane arguments. And everyone in the political, or I should say everyone, no matter what side you're on, far left, far right, in the middle, you're trying to impose a moral point of view. And our friends at the Babylon Bee pointed this out. You know, some leftist woke churches, they'll say stuff like this. Church shouldn't be political, says pastor with BLM pride flags on building. These are moral positions as well, ladies and gentlemen. Again, the only question is, whose morality are you legislating? You know, Elisa yesterday was talking about progressive Christianity, and she mentioned the point that, can we all agree that if we're followers of Jesus, we ought to follow what he said? I mean, doesn't that make sense? Why do you call yourself a Christian if you're disagreeing with Jesus? How does that make any sense? Jesus isn't your God, you are. And by the way, if everything was completely obvious, because not every moral position is completely obvious, if everything was completely obvious, morality-wise, we wouldn't even need a Bible, would we? The big issues are obvious, but there are smaller ones that aren't, and that's why we need revelation. So God isn't going to agree with you or me on everything. We need to bow our knee to him, not whatever we want. So, morality is always legislated. The only question is whose morality? The second question is, should Christians be involved in politics? And before we get into this, maybe we ought to define what politics is. What is politics? Poly, which means many, ticks, meaning blood-sucking insects. Many blood-sucking insects. No, that's, I don't think that's the etymology of it. But anyway, it's basically people coming together to decide how they're going to govern themselves. Question, why shouldn't Christians be involved? Are only atheists qualified to run the country? Where does that come from? In fact, when people tell me we ought not be involved in politics, whether they're Christians or not, I just show them this one image which you can get off the web. What is this? Does anyone know what this is? Yeah, that's the Korean Peninsula satellite imagery at night. Here's the 38th parallel right here. We fought a war over that. You know, the war's still going on. There's just kind of a shooting has stopped, but hostilities are still going on. This is South Korea. It's filled with light. It's filled with productivity. It has religious freedom. It has the gospel. This is North Korea. It's a concentration camp. There's one major reason for the difference between South and North Korea. What is it? Don't say electricity. What is it? Politics. The South has political freedom. The North does not. Here's my question. Which country would you rather live in? Politics matters. In fact, I hear many Christians, and particularly pastors, present company excluded, but I hear many pastors saying things like, oh, I don't get involved in politics. I just preach the gospel. To which I respond, if you don't think politics are important, you don't think the gospel's important. Why? Because politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel. If you don't think so, go to North Korea. Can you do what we're doing in this room right now legally in North Korea? No, because politically they've ruled it out. If you don't think politics are important, go to some of the countries I've been to. I've been to Iran. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been to China. You know there's no Calvary Chapel of Tehran. There's no First Baptist Church of Riyadh. There's no crossexamine.org in Beijing. Why? Because politically they don't allow it. Politics affects your ability to preach and live the gospel. Why don't we realize that? Because we think we're protected by the United States Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, there are people in office right now and people that want to get in office that want to destroy that. And we're just a couple of judges away from you losing your ability to preach and live the gospel. In fact, if you think about this, politics affects almost every aspect of your life. Politics affects your church, your family, your health, your money, your business, your freedom, your property, your school, your safety, the poor, the unborn, evangelism, your faith behavior, whether or not you can live out your faith. It affects everyone and everything. Why shouldn't Christians be involved? You know, we have this idea that we can bifurcate our life. You know, when we go to church on Sunday or Saturday night, whenever, yeah, we'll be Christians there. But we don't have to be Christians outside of this. We'll follow Jesus in church, but not outside the walls of the church. Where do we come up with that? Do you realize as a Christian, you're supposed to be a Christian in church, you're supposed to be a Christian at home, at work, online, at play, in the voting booth. Everywhere you go, you're a Christian 24/7, 365. In fact, David Noble, who started Summit Ministries a number of years ago, it's a great worldview camp. I teach there sometimes. Elisa does. Many other apologists and theologians do. It brings young people through 2 weeks of study in apologetics and philosophy and theology. Every summer they do about 7 or 8 sessions. And the founder, David Noble, at one point gave all 400 students a test where he put a whole bunch of professions on a list, and he said, is this a sacred or secular profession? So, you know, he'd have missionary and pastor and businessman and dentist and doctor and pharmacist, you know, just a whole bunch of different professions. Is it sacred or secular? Only 2 out of 400 students got 100% on the test. Those 2 students checked everything sacred. There are no secular professions. Unless you're a hitman or a drug dealer, okay? Everything falls under the jurisdiction of Christ. And we need a government to protect innocent people from evil. This is what Paul says in Romans 13. 13:4, he says, The ruler does not bear the sword for nothing. In other words, the ruler, whoever is in charge, has the ability to implement punishment on people who are hurting others. The main purpose of government is to protect innocent people from evil. If you don't have government, you're going to have anarchy. And because we're fallen, we talked about this yesterday, because our natures are corrupt, because it's easy to be bad and hard to be good, we at least need some level of government to protect innocent people from evil. In fact, nothing's been said more pithy about government than the father of our Constitution, James Madison, who said this: if men were angels, no government would be necessary. You want to know what government or what the world would be like without any government? This is, by the way, this is why defund the police was the most idiotic political idea of the past decade. Defund the police? What do you think would happen if the Melbourne Police Department said that tomorrow, for 24 hours, there will be no enforcement of any laws? You can do whatever you want for 24 hours. You'll never be prosecuted. What do you think would happen? How many people would be murdered? How many people would be raped? How much theft would go on? Would the Best Buy survive? Would the Lexus dealer survive? Now, we already have this in California. You know, in California, you can like shoplift up to $1,000. They're not going to do anything for you. It's crazy. Walgreens had to close 17 stores in San Francisco because people were just walking in and taking stuff, and they could do nothing about it. This is madness. Are we supposed to love our neighbors? Of course we're supposed to love our neighbors. Let me ask you a few questions if you're still not convinced we ought to be involved in politics. First question, should Christians care how people are treated? Is there any Christian who's going to say no? Everybody's going to say, yes, we have to care how people are treated. Next question, should Christians care how people are treated by their government? Welcome to politics, ladies and gentlemen. If you say yes to number one, you got to say yes to number two. And let me also ask you this, is there any area of your life where you should not follow Jesus and the apostles? That's what I just mentioned. Every area of your life, including how you interact with others in the public square, how you vote, who you support, what policies you support. Everything ought to be driven by what Jesus and the apostles said. You say, well, you know, Christians really haven't done much in politics. Yeah, you're probably right. We haven't done much in the past 2,000 years other than getting rid of slavery, gladiatorial combat, death games, temple prostitution, kidnapped brides, wives as property, infanticide, child labor, child marriage, child sexual abuse, child prostitution, class distinctions, and in some states now abortion. Yeah, other than that, we haven't done much. Take the big picture, ladies and gentlemen. For the past 2,000 years, this is what Christianity has done to civilize the West. In fact, Western civilization is built on Jesus. And so we have to be engaged. And by the way, when you get involved in some sort of political cause, your job isn't to win, your job is to be faithful. So even if you don't think there's any hope you're going to win, you just do what's right and leave the results to God. And actually, you might win here on Prop 4 because you need a 60% threshold to pass that, I understand. And if you get enough Christians out there voting against Amendment 4, as Joseph so articulately presented, we can stop the murder of children in Florida. You need to vote no on Amendment 4. You say, well, you know, Bible writers or the Bible characters didn't get involved in politics. Yeah, except these people: Joseph, Moses, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Daniel, Nehemiah, Esther, Nahum, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, John the Baptist, Paul, and Jesus. Jesus got involved in politics? Yeah, he did. Who? When? Where? How? Who were the people that Jesus went after the most? The Pharisees. Who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Many of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the Jewish ruling council that made the laws in Israel, and Rome delegated day-to-day lawmaking authority to them. And here's what Jesus said to these people. He went off on them in so many different ways, and in Matthew 23, he really put the hammer down on these politicians. And it's easy to remember. It's Matthew 23:23. Here's what he said. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Now notice, the more important matters of the law. You've neglected the more important matters of the law. Justice, number one, mercy and faithfulness. We're going to see here in a minute, that's what we're doing here in America. We're neglecting the more important matters of the law. But before we unpack that, I want to point out that this are the four different options we have as Christians with regard to political engagement, because there can be excesses. Look at the one on the left here. You have the flag over the cross. That might be what some people call Christian nationalism. That is idolatry and corruption. If you're saying that your country's more important than God, if you're saying anything's more important than God, you're involved in idolatry and confusion, or corruption, I should say. What if you put the flag and the cross on the same level? Well, that's idolatry and confusion. The flag is not at the same level as the cross. But you know what most Christians take? The position they take is the third one. Let's just preach the gospel. You're neglecting your neighbor. Oh, you think, well, I'm loving God. Yeah, but you're not loving your neighbor. Why are you not involved to prevent your government or prevent laws that are going to hurt your neighbor? Why are you not involved to stop those laws or to put good laws in place that protect your neighbor? Why are you not involved? Because you don't care about your neighbor? You're supposed to love your neighbor. How can you do it when you don't even know them? Well, you can make sure that laws are put in place that protect them from evil. The proper orientation is the cross over the flag. There you're loving God and you're loving your neighbor. Now, I'm going to send you all these slides here at the end so you don't have to keep taking pictures of them. I know you're not taking pictures of me. All right, so let's now get to brass tacks. This is what we're all waiting for. What should Christians do when we don't like either candidate? Look, we can legislate morality. That's all we can legislate. Should Christians be involved in politics? Yes. In fact, every citizen ought to be involved in politics, whether you're a Christian or not, especially if you care about other people. But what do we do when we don't like either candidate? I mean, let's admit it. These candidates have some personal moral problems. Can we all agree on that, ladies and gentlemen? Don't run from that. Admit that. Don't sugarcoat stuff. Admit it. For example, Trump said, I've done more for Christianity than Jesus. You got to love the Babylon Bee, ladies and gentlemen. Now, this is funny because you could see him saying that, right? He didn't say it, okay, but he's a braggart. We all get that. They say Trump lies. You know what Trump does more than anything? He just exaggerates. Nobody's ever seen anything like it. You know, we had the best economy ever. Well, come on. And then Kamala Harris distances herself from Kamala Harris. She won't answer questions. She won't do an interview. All those statements she made over the years, running for Senate, running for DA, running for vice president, she knows they're not winners. She wants to actually use your money to transition your children without your knowledge. She wants to use your money to transition prisoners in jail She wants to give benefits to illegal aliens, but not you? She wants to decriminalize people coming across the border. She wants to pay for abortion with your money up to the moment of birth. She can't admit it, but that's what she's been for. Now, as soon as you start talking about this and specific candidates, people are going to say, no politician can be your savior. I agree. No politician can be your savior. No politician can be my savior. However, no spouse can be your savior either, but it's still important that you pick the right one. Look, Christianity is not just fire insurance, ladies and gentlemen. Christianity isn't all about just getting to heaven. If that were the case, as soon as you became a believer, God would translate you to heaven, it'd be over. No, you're here to be salt and light. You're here to occupy till I come. You're here to make disciples of all nations. You're here to love your neighbor. You're not just here to get fire insurance, wait for your body to break down and go, oh, take me home, Lord. You need to be engaged in every area of life. And just because no politician can be your savior doesn't mean you shouldn't care about what's done in the political realm. Your wife or husband can't be your savior either, but it's still important. In fact, I don't know if you know Gary Hamrick. Do you know who Gary Hamrick is? He's another great Calvary Chapel pastor like you have here. And a couple of weeks ago, Gary did a sermon on his election 2024 sermon. We have it at yourfaith.net, voteyourfaith.net. There's a lot up at voteyourfaith.net. Check out that website, including Gary's presentation. It'll take you to his YouTube channel, and a presentation I've done, and a presentation by Alan Parr and others about this. And Gary said this during his presentation. He said, you know, he lamented some of the downside of the personal downside of Trump and all this, and he said, but look, I'm not going to get 100% of everything I want. He said, you hardly ever get 100% of what you want. Are any of you married? And everybody laughed. Why? Because you're not going to get 100% of what you want even in a marriage, and yet you married the person. Why? Because no one's perfect. You're not going to get everything you want. So don't think, well, I'm not getting everything I want. If you're getting the more important matters of the law, which is what we're about to look at, then as it lines up with the scriptures and lines up with natural law, then you ought to vote that way. In fact, that's what we're going to look at right now. When Jesus was talking to the politicians, he said, you've neglected the more important matters of the law. What does that mean? They were tithing their spices, mint, dill, and cumin. They did that, and they did it rightly, but they were neglecting the bigger issues. And we're doing that in this country right now. We're telling people what light bulbs they can and can't use, but we won't say don't murder your children. Kamala Harris wants to ban plastic straws, but she doesn't want to ban child castration. Is she neglecting the more important matters of the law? And we've been doing it in this country for many years. You have to say, how can there be more important matters of the law? Isn't all sin sin? Yeah, all sin is sin, but there are different levels of sin, and there are different levels of good deeds as well. I don't have time to go through all the scriptures here, but if you know what Jesus said and the apostles said, there's a moral hierarchy, because he talks about the greatest commandment, greater love, greater sin, greater judgment, greater knowledge will give you greater punishment. And right here he talks about the more important matters of the law. There are issues that are more important than other issues. And you could probably find things you like in both platforms. But you need, according to Jesus, to not neglect the more important matters of the law. So the question we want to ask ourselves is, does abortion trump everything else? I mentioned, and Joseph did as well, that the right to life is the right to all other rights. If you don't have life, you don't have anything. Let me show you something from David Daladin. I don't know if you've ever heard this name. You probably haven't because the media suppressed it, but in 2014 and 2015, David Daladin, as about a 27-year-old man, did some undercover work where he videotaped Planned Parenthood admitting that they were selling baby body parts. I'm not going to show you the whole video. This is about 3 minutes. The whole thing's 8 minutes long. This is just a 3-minute clip. I want to show you what he found. He's interviewing a high executive at Planned Parenthood, and they're talking about how much money it costs for a liver, what does it cost for a brain, what does it cost for an arm, whatever. You're going to have to read what she's saying because the mic isn't very close to her. But check this out.
A lot of people want intact parts these days because they're looking for specific nodes, AB nodes, SA. I was like, wow, I didn't even know. Good for them. Yesterday was the first time she said people wanted lungs. And then, like I said, always as many intact livers as possible. People just want
livers.
Some people want lower extremities too, which that's simple. I mean, that's easy. I don't know what they're doing with it. I guess they want muscle.
Yeah, a dime a dozen.
Here's an actual order form. You can order what you want.
I'm the medical director for the national office for all of the affiliates. So I say, okay, what are you looking to supply today? We've been very good at getting heart, lung, liver. Every provider has had patients who want to donate their tissue, and they absolutely want to accommodate them. They just want to do it in a way that is not perceived as this clinic is selling tissue, this clinic is making money off of this.
Okay, so when you are or the affiliate is determining what that is monetary,
Yes.
so that it doesn't raise any question of this is what it's about. This is the main. What price range would you?
You know, I'm going to throw a number out. I would say it's probably anywhere from $30 to $100, depending on the facility and what's involved.
The $30 to $100 price, or that's per specimen that we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yes.
The $30 to $100 price, or that's per specimen that we're talking about, right? Yeah.
Yes.
How much of a difference can that actually make if you know what's expected or what we need versus?
It makes a huge difference. I'd say a lot of people want liver, and for that reason, most providers will do this case under ultrasound guidance, so they'll know where they're putting their forceps. Kind of rate-limiting step of the procedure is calvarium. Calvarium, the head is basically the biggest part. Most of the other stuff can come out intact.
Right.
It's very rare to have a patient that doesn't have enough dilation to evacuate all the other
To bring the body cavity out intact and all that.
So then you're just kind of cognizant of where you put your brassicas. You try to intentionally go above and below the thorax so that, we've been very good at getting heart, lung, liver, because we know that, so I'm not going to crush that part. I'm going to basically crush below, I'm going to crush above, and I'm going to see that get out intact. And with the calvarium, in general, some people will actually try to change the presentation so that it's not a vertex, because when it's a vertex presentation, you never have enough dilation at the beginning of the case unless you have real huge amount of dilation to deliver an intact calvarium. So if you do it starting from the breech presentation, there's dilation that happens as the case goes on, and often the last you can evacuate an intact calvarium. again. So I mean, there are certainly steps that can be taken.
So they can
try
convert to breach,
ensure-
for example, at the start of the...
Exactly. They,
Excellent.
under ultrasound guidance, they can just change the presentation.
The Attorney General in California at the time was Kamala Harris. And you know what Kamala Harris did? She didn't go after Planned Parenthood, the people illegally selling baby body parts. She went after David Daladin for filming this without their consent. Yeah, you heard me right. In fact, for some reason, this trial has been delayed. Another attorney general took over after her, and David Daladin is supposed to go to trial this December. This is 9 years later. So much for a speedy trial. Oh, it's just a blob of tissue. If it's just a blob of tissue, how are they pulling body parts out of the womb? I want a liver. I want a head. Well, we'll orient the baby in such a way that we can not crush the head. In fact, just this August, New York Post, Kamala Harris accused of weaponizing California AG's office for mega-sponsor Planned Parenthood. Why didn't she go after Planned Parenthood? Number one, it's the sacrament of the left. Number two, Planned Parenthood donates to her campaign. Follow the money. This is why the Babylon Bee said, Kamala proposes $6,000 aborted baby tax credit. You know, many of their headlines come true. Did you know that? This is what we're dealing with. So does abortion trump everything else? Are you a one-issue voter? No, I'm not a one-issue voter. There's a lot of other issues I'm concerned about as well. But I am a one-issue disqualifier. If you're going to say that you want abortion legal up to 9 months and you want the government to pay for it, you are not qualified to be the President of the United States. What do you think Jesus would want us to do? What are the more important matters of the law, ladies and gentlemen? Well, let's just take a quick look. These positions are based on either their platforms or their policies, and I can give you references for each one of them. Let's talk about abortion. We already know the Democrats want to pay for it up to the moment of birth. The Republicans have slopped this off on the states to let them restrict it. This is not a good development for the Republican Party. They're moving left as well. But I am comforted by one thing. It's something that Ben Shapiro said about 6 years ago, and I think he's right. He said, pay no attention to what Trump says, pay attention to what Trump does. Because... And by the way, I'm not endorsing Trump, okay? I don't endorse candidates because then you got to explain everything the candidate does, and I can't. And I won't. I won't defend a lot of the stuff he does. But I am defending policies that line up with the Bible and line up with natural law. But notice who Trump put on the Supreme Court. He put on good justices. He just asked the Federalist Society, who should I put on? He didn't know any better. And he'll do that again. Put justices in there. And certainly, the Republicans aren't going to pay for abortion. The Democrats will. Religious freedom is restricted. The so-called Equality Act they want to pass. If the Equality Act, which isn't about equality at all, passes, then you are not going to be able to control what the government does to your children in school at all. If they want to transition, you're going to get the California law. And you're going to be paying for transitions with your tax dollars. Anything LGBTQ will take precedence over anything the Bible says, any religious freedom you have. You think I'm making this up. Look into it. The Equality Act. It's not about equality at all. It's about putting this radical ideology over the First Amendment and over any Christian, Jewish, or even Muslim practice when it comes to life and the practice of the faith. Obviously, Republicans want that unrestricted. Transition children, just go to California if you want to see what policies are over there. I already mentioned them. Of course, Republicans are against it. Judges. You've got law-making judges versus law-applying judges. In fact, Kamala Harris wants to stack the Supreme Court to get political decisions out of a body that's not supposed to be political. You see the point? Why did we have Roe v. Wade? Why do we have Obergefell? Why do we have prayer out of schools, Bible studies, or Bible reading out of schools? Where did all this come from? Nobody voted on it. It was all activist Supreme Court judges putting their policy preferences into their decisions, usurping the Constitution and usurping the will of the people. Race-neutral policies. You're going to say, what do you mean race-neutral policies? Against it. The Democrats are against race-neutral policies. What do I mean? In their 2020 platform, they said this. I don't know about the 2024. It's murky. We don't know because it was written for Biden, and Harris won't tell us any of her policy positions except abortion. But in the 2020 platform, on page 40, they said race-neutral policies aren't enough. We need to actually use race to even things out. You know what this means, ladies and gentlemen? In order to combat old racism, we need to introduce new racism. Ladies and gentlemen, that's not the way forward. Do not pit citizens against one another based on the color of their skin. We're all equal. There's only one race, the human race. And by the way, those policies have a counterproductive effect on the people that it's supposed to help. Oh, I know why you got hired. You're the diversity hire. That's not fair to that person. Maybe that person was qualified to be there, but everybody's thinking, oh, you're the diversity hire. Come to think of it, we have a diversity hire for the Democrat nominee, don't we? The woman hasn't gotten one vote yet. School choice. By the way, there's a great school choice bill or law now in Arizona, saving a lot of kids. Republican governor put it in place. The Democrats are against it. The Republicans are for it. How about the border? You know all about that down here. In fact, every state knows more about it. I just read an article this morning as to how many illegal aliens have been actually put in swing states. And the Democrats did not want to approve the SAVE Act. What's the SAVE Act? The SAVE Act was to reaffirm that illegal aliens cannot vote in our elections. They didn't want that. Why? Why is the border open? The number one purpose of government is to protect innocent people from evil. How are we protecting innocent people from evil when, as you saw last week, the acting director of ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, something like that, came out and said there are at least 425,000 convicted criminals roaming the streets who are illegal aliens in America. We've admitted over 13,000 murderers, convicted murderers, over 16,000 convicted sex offenders, and several other criminals, and they're roaming our streets. This is a dereliction of duty, ladies and gentlemen. You say, well, we ought to be for immigration. We are for immigration, but legal immigration. People say, the Bible isn't for borders. Nonsense. God established borders at first at the Tower of Babel, spread out, and then he established nations. He even told Israel, don't cross the border into Edom, don't cross the border into Moab, There's a wall around Jerusalem, and the Great Commission says, go therefore make disciples of all. Everybody believes in borders. Anyone who says they don't believe in borders, just ask them, do you have a lock on your door? Oh, you do? Why? Because you know you just can't let anybody in your house without vetting them, and you can't let anybody come into your house and take all your resources. You don't have enough resources. It's not compassionate to allow an open border. Why? Because we are actually allowing criminals, terrorists, drugs, women being sex trafficked, girls being sex trafficked across the border. There's over 300,000 missing children in our country, and they're probably now being forced into prostitution because the border is open. I remember back when President Obama was president, and he said, walls don't work. And Charles Krauthammer said, walls don't work, then why is there one around the White House? You're not helping these people either. They're leaving countries, and they are the intellectual property of their country. They can help their country, but they're coming here. And they're leaving their country, hurting their country from getting on their feet. We just did a live stream on Thursday night on our YouTube channel. It's called The Shocking History of Open Borders with historian Bill Federer. Bill Federer knows more about history than any 10 people I know. You might want to go watch that because it's about an hour and a half long, and we cover the gambit on all the objections regarding this issue and how an open border will ultimately destroy any nation. It destroyed the Roman Empire. It destroyed Beirut. Beirut used to be Club Med back 60 years ago. Now it's in civil war all the time. Why? Too much immigration. It's destroying London. It's destroying Paris. It's destroying Western civilization because many people that come across don't assimilate, and they bring the values, quite often it's Sharia law, with them. And it's destroying parts of Minneapolis. It's destroying Dearborn. Look, you can tell I'm not being politically correct. This is what's happening. It doesn't feel good, I get it. Facts don't care about your feelings. In fact, Bill Federer gave this analogy the other day. He said, if I were to put a year's worth of food in front of you and tell you to eat it today, it would kill you. You can't assimilate that much food into your body. But if you took a little each day, you'd be able to live. That's the same with immigration. We can take a little bit, we can't take it all at once. And there's a party out there, that the Democrat Party, that wants to open the borders and just wants to make this one-party rule, and ultimately it's going to destroy the country. What's the bottom line? I can't vote for either of these candidates. I don't like either of them. I'm with you, okay? But you need to remember something, ladies and gentlemen. You're not voting for one person when you're voting for president. You're voting for 5,000 people to go to Washington and implement an agenda, implement a platform, implement a set of policies. Read the policies, vote policy over personality. Because you're not voting for one person. You're going to get a whole bunch of policies behind, and a whole bunch of other political appointees and administrative workers behind either one of these two people. If you can't stomach voting for these people, think about the policies behind them. So, can we legislate morality? Of course, that's all we can legislate. Should Christians be involved in politics? Of course. If we're going to love our neighbor, we have to be involved. Everybody ought to be involved. What should you do when you don't like either candidate? Vote the more important matters of the law. Vote policy over personality. You're getting 5,000 people that are going to come behind these people and implement all of those policies. All right? Now, one final point on this. Here's what Isaiah, back in the days of Israel, said about the leaders of Israel, how they were asleep. when their country was about to be destroyed. He said, Israel's watchmen are blind. They all lack knowledge. They are all mute dogs. They cannot bark. They lie around and dream. They love to sleep. They are dogs with mighty appetites. They never have enough. They are shepherds who lack understanding. They all turn to their own way. Each seeks his own gain. Tragically, I see many Christians worried about, if I say anything, if I step up, if I do anything, I'm going to lose something. So I'm just going to be quiet. Okay. Country's going to end. Because you've been silent. Don't even think of yourself. Think of your kids. Think of your grandkids. Pastors out there, your job is not to be tax exempt. Your job is to be salt and light. Your job. By the way, no church has ever lost their tax exempt status anyway. You're supposed to do what's right and leave the results to God. One last thing. You guys know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer was? Eric Metaxas wrote a great biography of him back in 2010. He was a German pastor who basically stood up to Hitler. I don't have time to give you all the details. He was actually implicated in the Valkyrie plot to kill Hitler in July 20th, 1944. And he and many others were executed for that. He was hung in a concentration camp about a few weeks before the Allies liberated the camp in 1945. But Bonhoeffer said, we just can't sit around and allow evil to overtake our society. You know, you've heard the story of the church singing their hymns louder so they didn't have to hear the cries of the Jews in the train going behind the church. They're on their way to Auschwitz. They're on their way to a concentration camp. And instead of getting involved, the church just sang their hymns louder to drown out the cries of the Jews. Here's what Bonhoeffer said about that kind of thing. He said, mere waiting and looking on is not Christian behavior. The Christian is called to sympathy and action, not in the first place by his own sufferings, but by the sufferings of his brethren, for whose sake Christ suffered. In other words, when people are suffering, you've got to get out there and help them, even if it's going to cause pain to you. And then there was this movement in Germany at the time called the Oxford Movement, which was a group of Christians who said the solution to all this is to convert Hitler. If we could get Hitler to become a Christian, all our problems would be solved. Now, of course, it'd be nice to convert Hitler, but here's what Bonhoeffer thought about all this. He said the Oxford movement was naive enough to try and convert Hitler, a ridiculous failure to recognize what is going on. We are the ones to be converted, not Hitler. We are the ones to be converted. We have the ability to turn the country toward good. You don't have to convert the leader. You've got to be salt and light. You know, you don't need to convince one leftist or one liberal or one moderate or one libertarian to do what's right. You just need to get the church to vote biblically, problem solved. Do you know that half of Christians don't even vote? They don't even vote. They don't realize they're supposed to be salt and light in every area of life. Get your friends to vote biblically on the more important matters of the law. Why? Because I want to live in the country here, not the country here. How about you? Amen. Let's do it.